The dust in Redstone Gap never truly settled. It only moved. From the road to the porches. From the porches to collars to the corners of eyes. A fine, pale grit that coated everything like a second skin nobody asked for. This morning the dust was thicker than usual. Maybe it was the crowd. Maybe the season. Or maybe the land itself was restless. Uneasy about what was coming to that square of packed earth. Between the general store and the saloon, 300 souls called this place home. This morning, at least 200 showed up. Some came because they needed labor. Some came out of curiosity. And some, the ones pressing toward the front, faces already arranged into disgust before they'd seen who was being brought out, came because watching another man's humiliation made them feel, just for a moment, like they stood on higher ground. People do that. More than they'd ever admit, on the platform, a man held a paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, and a man in irons was led out into the light. The dust in Redstone Gap never really settled. It just moved around. From the street to the storefronts. From the storefronts to the people standing in front of them. Into collars and cuffs and the corners of eyes. A fine, pale grit that coated everything. In the valley. Like a second skin. Nobody asked for on the morning of the auction. The dust was worse than usual. Maybe because of the crowd. Maybe because of the season. Or maybe the land itself was restless. Unsettled by what was about to happen in that square patch of packed earth between Bradley's General Store and the Rusty Nail Saloon, 300 people called Redstone Gap home. At least 200 of them showed up that morning. Some came because they needed labor. Someone strong. Someone who would work in conditions no hired man would accept for reasonable wages. Some came because they were curious. And some, the ones who stood nearest the front, the ones whose faces were already arranged into expressions of disgust, before they'd even seen who was being sold. Some came because watching another person's humiliation made them feel, just for a moment, like they were standing on higher ground. People do that, more than they'd ever admit. Deputy Reeves stood on the platform. He was not a bad man. That was the tragedy of him. He was just a man who had learned, very early and very thoroughly, that keeping his mouth shut kept his family fed. He'd been telling himself that so long it didn't feel like a choice anymore. He had a paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, and Harlan Briggs was brought out. Here is what the crowd saw. A big man. Not just tall, solid. The kind of build that doesn't come from a gym or a ranch or even a mining camp. The kind that comes from 2 decades of actual wilderness, of hauling game down mountain slopes in winter, of building shelter with whatever the land offered, of surviving things that would kill most men before breakfast. His hair was dark, long, past his shoulders. His beard had gone untrimmed for weeks in the jail. His skin was weathered deep, the deep bronze of a man who lived outside in all seasons, and underneath that, something else, the heritage of his Shoshone mother, written plainly on his face for anyone who knew how to read it, which most people in Redstone Gap did not. His wrists were in iron shackles. His ankles, too. The chain between his feet was short enough to make walking awkward. Deliberate, a calculated humiliation, the kind that said, "Look how contained he is. Look how much we had to do just to manage him." And then people actually looked at his face. And something happened, because he wasn't looking at the ground, he wasn't looking at his chains. He was looking at them, slowly, steadily, moving through the crowd with those dark eyes the way a man looks at a landscape he's trying to understand. Not angry, not afraid, just watching like he was the one studying them, not the other way around. Several people in the front row shifted uncomfortably without understanding why. The ones near the back strained to see better. And somewhere at the left edge of the crowd, a woman in a faded brown dress pressed her lips together and felt something move in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Deputy Reeves read from the paper. The charges were trespassing on the property of Mr. Victor Aldgate of the AA Ranch. Unlawful seizure of livestock, destruction of property valued at. The crowd stopped listening to the specifics. They never really needed specifics. Half-breed. That word moved through the gathered people like a current, quiet enough that Reeves pretended not to hear it, loud enough that everyone did. Savage. Another one. Bist, and then a laugh from somewhere in the middle. Brief. Satisfied. The laugh of someone who found the situation entertaining. Harlan Briggs did not flinch. His jaw tightened. Just barely. Then released, like a man making a deliberate decision in real time. A decision that said, "That is not yours. My reaction does not belong to you." Reeves announced the starting bid, $50. The mine owner on the North Ridge went first. 60. Then Ray Hutchins, Aldgate's foreman, which made several people in the crowd exchange glances, because why would Aldgate bid on a man he'd just prosecuted? Came in at 65.70, back to 65.67, and then $80. The voice was clear. Not loud. It didn't need to be loud. It had the quality of a voice accustomed to being heard over wind and weather and difficult circumstances. A voice that had said hard things in hard places and hadn't looked away while saying them. Every head turned left. She was already moving through the parting crowd. Not hurrying. Not performing. Just walking like a woman who had made up her mind and found the opinions of the assembled bystanders entirely beside the point. Nora Voss. 32 years old. Auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that had probably started the morning neatly and had since made its own decisions. Green eyes that were, at this moment, doing something very specific. They were focused on Deputy Reeves and nowhere else. Not on the crowd. Not on Harlan Briggs. Just on the transaction she had come here to complete. Her dress was clean. Faded. The kind of faded that comes from honest use and too many washings, not from neglect. Her boots were practical. Her hands, holding the worn leather purse, were steady. She stopped at the edge of the platform. She opened the purse. She removed a small cloth bundle and set it in front of Reeves with a sound like a door closing. Count it if you need to. The square went absolutely silent. Reeves looked at the bundle. Looked at her. Looked at Hutchins, who looked back toward the far edge of the crowd, where Victor Aldgate stood in his expensive coat and his expensive hat, watching everything with the patience of a man who believed time was always on his side. Aldgate gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Hutchins let it go. $80, Reeves said slowly. He looked around the square, going once, the crowd held its breath, going twice, nobody moved, sold. To Mrs. Voss, the silence broke all at once, not in celebration. In something that sounded like a dozen conversations starting simultaneously. None of them kind. "Nora, have you completely lost your mind?" That was Margaret Holt, the deputy's wife, hand pressed to her sternum like she'd been struck. "You can't bring that onto your property," male voice. She didn't look to see who, a woman alone with a... She stopped listening, not because she couldn't hear them. She could hear all of it. Every word. Every sharp intake of breath. Every muttered syllable that she would replay later, alone in her kitchen, long after the lamp had burned low. But right now she had a job to do. She looked at the platform, and for the first time since she'd arrived in that square, Nora Voss looked directly at Harlan Briggs. He was already looking at her. He had been watching her since she spoke. His expression was unreadable, in the way that very still water is unreadable. You can see the surface clearly, but you can't be certain what's underneath, or how deep it goes. He was trying to figure her out. What she wanted, what she was. What kind of person does this and why? She met his gaze, held it, didn't explain herself then. She turned back to Reeves. "I'll need the keys." Here is what Nora Voss told herself that morning. She told herself, "This is practical. This is arithmetic." A man strong, capable, with structure and animals, bought at auction for $80, which is less than 2 months of wages for a hired hand, who can walk off the job whenever he chooses. She told herself, the ranch needs work that one person cannot do alone. I've been that one person for 3 years, and the evidence is everywhere I look. She told herself, this is not about him specifically. This is about the work. This is about survival. She was mostly telling herself the truth. Mostly, because there was the other thing. The thing she was not going to examine too closely right now, standing in a town square while 200 people talked about her. When Harlan Briggs was brought out onto that platform, when she saw him stand in those chains, without bowing his head, without begging, without giving the crowd what it wanted, she thought of Edmund, her husband, dead 3 years now. She'd stopped counting the months and days somewhere around year 2. Counting felt like holding a door open for a room you couldn't live in anymore. Edmund, who had stood in a different kind of impossible situation once. A failed harvest, a debt he hadn't told her about, men at the door, and stood up straight and faced it. Not because he wasn't afraid. She'd seen his hand shaking. Because he'd decided that how you stand in a hard moment is the one thing nobody can take from you. The man on that platform had made the same decision. She could see it, the deliberateness of it, the choice. And she thought, I know what kind of man makes that choice. Then Reeves announced the starting bid, and the arithmetic took over. Because the arithmetic was easier. The arithmetic didn't make her chest ache, but the other thing was there, underneath. Bobby, the paperwork took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of Reeves moving slowly through documents that did not require that much time. Finding reasons to recheck figures, asking questions that didn't need asking. Making her wait in the hard chair outside his office. With the deliberate patience of a man exerting what power he's had over a situation that had slipped beyond his control. She waited. She was good at waiting. 3 years on a failing ranch had made her very good at enduring things that couldn't be hurried. Sheriff Harlan. No, the actual county sheriff was out of town. Reeves was acting in his capacity. Focus. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the wall. The wall had a wanted poster on it. A man named Declan Fitch. Cattle theft. She read it 3 times just to have something to do with her eyes. The door opened. Reeves came out with a paper, held it out, watched her sign it with an expression that suggested he expected her to change her mind at any moment, and was somewhat disappointed when she didn't. The keys, Mr. Reeves. He handed them over, slowly. Like he was being parted from something. She went to the holding yard behind the office. Harlan Briggs was sitting on an overturned crate when she came through the gate. He'd heard her coming. She could tell. He wasn't startled. He just looked up, that same unhurried attention, and waited. Nora stopped a few feet away. I'm going to unlock those, she said, holding up the key. You'll ride with me to my ranch, an hour out roughly. There's food there, a place to sleep. Work in exchange, a pause. I can't pay wages, not yet. But I can offer what I have, which is honest work and honest treatment. He watched her. You're not running, she said. Not a question. A statement. I'm not asking you to. But I want you to understand. If you stay, it's because you choose to, not because you owe me anything. The $80 bought your freedom, not your obligation. Something shifted in his expression. Small. Hard to name. Why, he asked. His voice was deep, roughened from weeks of disuse in that cell. The accent in it, something that sat between the mountains and somewhere older, made the single word carry more weight than most people managed in a sentence. Why what? She said. Why does the difference matter to you? She looked at him for a moment. Because it's the difference between a free man and a different kind of chain, she said. And I've had enough of chains on this ranch to last me a lifetime. He studied her. Long enough that a lesser woman might have looked away. Nora Voss did not look away. I know you didn't steal that horse, she said. That got something. A real reaction, small and quickly controlled. His eyes sharpened. How? He said. Not a question, just how? Because I knew that horse, Nora said. Before Aldgate bought it at the estate sale after my husband died, it was Edmund's. Edmund's horse had a bad shoulder from a fall 2 years before he passed. He always said it would give out, one day. She paused. A man who steals a horse picks a good one. Silence. The wind moved through the yard. Dust? Of course. Always dust. You're smarter than they said, Harlan said. Who said? Men in the jail. They talked about the widow Voss, a beat. They said stubborn, they're not wrong, and proud, also not wrong. And something else. He paused. They said, difficult, and Nora Voss, who had not genuinely laughed in longer than she wanted to admit, felt the corner of her mouth do something it hadn't done in a very long time. Still not wrong, she said. Give me your wrist. She put the key in the first shackle. The borrowed horse from the livery was an older bay mare. She didn't love being borrowed. Made her feelings known in small, consistent ways throughout the first mile. Harlan handled her without drama. A few words, quiet enough that Nora couldn't hear them. An adjustment of weight in the saddle. The mare settled. They rode in silence for the first stretch. Not the awkward silence of two people who don't know what to say. The quieter kind. The kind that happens between people who are, each of them, busy thinking. Nora was thinking about the ranch, about the east fence, the pump, the 3-inch gap in the chicken coop that had let something in twice this week, the roof over the back bedroom that was going to become a serious problem before the first hard rain. She was making a list. She was always making a list. Harlan was reading the landscape. She noticed this sideways, without looking directly, the way his eyes moved, the way he'd glance at a ridgeline, then at the ground, then at the sky, in a sequence that seemed to mean something to him. Like he was checking in with the country they were riding through. Updating some internal record. The Shoshone name for that ridge, he said suddenly, nodding west, translates to something like, the place where water remembers. She looked at the ridge, then at him. Water remembers? Springs up there that run even in drought years. The water knows where to go. Been going there long before any of us arrived. She considered this. Your mother's people? Yes, you grew up with them? Some years. A pause that said there was considerably more to that answer, and he was choosing how much of it to offer. My father was a trapper. Scots-Irish out of Pennsylvania. He and my mother, he stopped. Started differently. I grew up in the mountains mostly. Both sides of the line and the mission school, she said. Because she'd overheard something in the holding yard. A comment from one of Reeves's men, his jaw tightened. 3 years. I'm sorry. He looked at her then. A quick, assessing glance. Like he was checking whether she meant it. She did. He looked back at the road. They cut the hair, forbade the language, beat you if they heard it anyway. He touched his chest briefly, without seeming to know he was doing it. Couldn't cut what's in here, good, Nora said. Not elaborated, not explained. Just, good. He looked at her again. This time he didn't look away as quickly. Your husband, he said. Edmund. What was he like? She hadn't expected that question. Most people who asked about Edmund asked how he died, or how she was managing, or whether she'd considered going back east to her family. Not what he was like, stubborn, she said. Funny when he thought no one was watching. Hopeless with the chickens. They scattered every time he came near the coop, which drove him absolutely insane. She paused. He could gentle a horse with just his voice. He had plans, big ones, for the ranch. For us, quieter now. Fever took him in 3 days. I tried everything I knew. Nothing worked. Grief is like water in the mountains, Harlan said. Sometimes still. Sometimes it floods. Can't stop it. Can only learn to move with it. She looked at him. He was watching the road again. Like he hadn't said anything particularly remarkable. She started. Stopped. That's the most sensible thing anyone has said to me in 3 years. He didn't respond. But she thought she saw something in the set of his shoulders, something that might, in different circumstances, become the beginning of something like ease. The Voss Ranch came into view as they crested the final hill. Nora always had a complicated moment here. Every time. That pause before descending, when she could see the whole property laid out below in whatever light the day offered. She loved it. That was the problem. She loved it the way you love something that's hurting you. and you can't stop. The main house listed slightly east, not dangerously, but visibly, like it was leaning into a wind that had stopped blowing. The barn was standing. That was something. The roof had 3 patches in it, each one different from the others, a patchwork history of each crisis she'd managed alone. The east fence line was a problem she'd been calling a manageable situation. For so long she'd almost started believing it. The garden was half choked with weeds despite her best efforts. The vegetable garden, specifically, the one she needed more than anything else, because it stood between her and actual hunger, and she was not going to let herself think too hard about that. She waited for the judgment. People always had something to say about the state of the Voss Ranch, always in the same tone. Part sympathy, part told you so. Part the satisfaction of someone who believed a woman alone couldn't manage what she was trying to manage. Harlan looked at the property for a long moment. Good bones, he said. Just that? What? She said. The house. He nodded toward the main structure. The frame's solid. The list is the foundation on one side. Probably a post that needs resetting, not structural rot. Barn frame looks sound. Fence posts are good pine. He looked at the garden. Soil's dark, healthy. Just needs clearing, he said. All of this the way a man reads a map. Factual. No drama, no pity. Like he'd looked at the ranch and seen not what it was, but what it could be. Nora stared at the side of his face for a moment. Then she clicked her tongue at Bess and started down the hill. Come on then, she said. I'll show you the tool shed. The tool shed smelled like Edmund. That was the thing nobody warned you about. 3 years. You'd think the smell would have faded by now. Wood polish and iron and something that was just him. Some particular combination of things she couldn't name individually, but knew collectively as her husband. She opened the shed door and stood back. Harlan went in. He examined each tool with his hands. Not cursory, thorough. Testing weight and balance and edge. The way a man evaluates something he intends to actually use, not just possess. He found the whetstone on the back shelf, held it up with a questioning look. Yes, she said. Whatever you need. He nodded once, set the whetstone aside with the tools he'd chosen, and turned to look at the rest of the shed. Taking inventory. She could see him making a mental list, the same way she made lists, which was strange. To recognize that in someone else, the barn loft, she said. There's a cot. Blankets in the trunk by the door. Lantern. A pause. It's basic. He looked at her. Is it acceptable? She asked. Formal. Because she realized, standing there, that she wasn't sure how to be with him exactly. She'd been certain about the transaction, less certain about what came after it. He looked around the shed, at the tools hanging in their places. At the last light coming through the single small window? Yes, he said. He picked up the tools he'd chosen. I'll start with the fence, he said. It's nearly dark, Nora said. The post near the east gate, he said, already moving toward the door. It's going to give way overnight if the wind picks up. I can see it from the ridge. She followed him out and looked at the east gate. She'd been calling that post a manageable situation for 2 months. You can see it but he was already walking. She made supper. Simple. Beans and cornbread, and the last of the preserved peaches from 2 summers ago, which she'd been saving for a reason she couldn't have named, and now seemed like the right time to use them. She put everything on a tray and carried it to the barn. She found him in the loft. He was sitting on the hay bale beside the cot, working something in his hands in the lamplight. She climbed the ladder and got close enough to see what it was, a length of broken harness. Buckle snapped at the base. She'd been meaning to replace it for 3 months. He was fixing it, neatly, precisely. With the spare buckle she'd forgotten was in the supply box at the back of the barn, the one Edmund had bought at the hardware store in town, 2 winters before he died. She hadn't even known that buckle was still there. You don't have to, she started. He looked up. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite amusement, wasn't quite seriousness. Somewhere between the two. like a man who finds something slightly absurd and has decided not to make a production of it. He looked at the harness, then at her. She got the message. "Right," she said. She set the tray down beside him. "There's plenty else that needs fixing around here." He looked at the food, then at the preserved peaches she'd been saving. His jaw shifted slightly. Not quite words, not quite a smile. She didn't know what to do with it. The barn cats appeared from whatever shadows they'd been occupying. 3 of them. Nora had stopped naming them after the 4th year because it made the losses harder. The boldest one, a gray tabby with strong opinions, went straight to Harlan and rubbed against his ankle. She watched from the bottom of the ladder. She watched his hand come down, slow, careful, and stroke the cat's head with a gentleness that seemed entirely at odds with everything about how he looked. "Oh," she thought, and then immediately, "Don't." And then she went inside. She lay awake that night. The house made its usual sounds. The creak of the east wall in the wind. The particular groan of the floorboard in the hallway that Edmund had always meant to fix and never got to. Underneath all of it, something new. The sound of someone else being awake on the property. She couldn't hear him. Not specifically, but she knew. The way you know things without being able to explain exactly how, that there was someone awake in that barn. That she was not alone on this land for the first time in 3 years. She should have found it unsettling. She didn't. And that, if she was being honest with herself, which she tried to be, even when she didn't particularly want to be, that was the thing she needed to examine. "You don't even know him," she told herself. "You made a transaction. He's an employee, essentially. That's all this is." The wind moved through the eaves. "That's all this is," she said again, to herself. In the dark, she almost believed it. 3 days. 3 days and the east fence was standing straight. Every post reset. New nails where the wood had gone soft. Wire rehung with the particular tautness of someone who understood the geometry of the thing. 3 days, and the harness was fixed. Along with 2 other pieces of equipment she hadn't even identified as broken, until he brought them to her door with the repairs already done. 3 days and the chicken coop had no more holes. The barn door no longer hung crooked. The well housing had been cleared of the debris that had been reducing water flow for 2 months, 3 days. She'd been managing this ranch alone for 3 years. She hadn't gotten a third of this done. She stood at the kitchen window the 3rd morning and watched him work, and had a feeling she could only describe as shame. Not the burning kind, the quieter kind. The kind that says, "You've been carrying something much heavier than you needed to, for much longer than necessary, because you were too proud to admit you needed help." Then he looked up from whatever he was doing, directly at the kitchen window, like he'd known she was standing there. She stepped back, then stepped forward again. "Stop it," she thought. "This is ridiculous. You are a grown woman." She made more coffee and took a cup outside to him. That's when he told her. They were standing at the repaired gate, 2 cups of coffee, the morning sun doing its slow work on the ridge. He was looking at the mountain, and she was trying not to look at him looking at the mountain, which was getting difficult. She asked him directly. Because she was a direct person, and she was tired of circling it. "Tell me what actually happened." With the horse, he was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Then, I found the horse on my land near the high camp. 3 weeks before the arrest." He drank his coffee. "I recognized Aldgate's brand. I assumed it had wandered. I was leading it down to return it when Hutchins found me. That's it. That's it. And the witnesses. 2 of Aldgate's men. Who'd just watched you find the horse on your land. Or who watched me stand next to a horse that belonged to their employer." He looked at his coffee cup. "Depends on how you want to tell the story." She looked at him. "Why didn't you explain this?" "At the hearing, I did." She already knew the answer to what she was about to say. She said it anyway. "And then the judge asked Hutchins if my account was accurate." He paused. "Judge Whitmore. Aldgate's hunting partner for the past 6 years. She pressed her lips together. There was no version of that hearing, Harlan said, where the outcome was different. I've been in this territory long enough to know which fights you can win, and which ones you walk into already losing. So you didn't fight, I said what was true. In a room where it didn't matter, he looked at the mountain. Same thing. The morning was quiet around them. Somewhere in the pasture. One of the two remaining horses, she'd had to sell 3 to pay the bank last winter, made a sound of contentment that seemed almost inappropriate given the conversation. I need to tell you something, Nora said. He waited. I didn't buy your freedom purely out of the goodness of my heart. She watched his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked attentive, like he was listening to something he'd already half suspected, and was glad to have confirmed. I needed labor I couldn't afford to hire, she said. The math worked out to this. And I want you to know that because, she stopped, started again, because you deserve to know who you're working for. And what the actual arrangement is. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. You know, I figured it. Not unkind. Not accusing. Just observed. Widow alone. Ranch failing. $80 spent at an auction instead of at the hardware store. He looked at the fence they'd spent 2 days fixing together. Makes sense. You're not angry. He thought about this. Actually thought about it, with the same careful attention he gave to everything. No, he said. You could have left me there. Your reasons don't change that. A pause. Also, he said. And there it was again. That thing in his voice that wasn't quite amusement, but was something. Your cornbread is better than the jail. She looked at him. He looked back, and Nora Voss, who had been managing alone and rigid and carefree for 3 years, and some months she'd stopped counting, laughed a real laugh. Surprised out of her, it startled both of them equally. She found the papers on a Thursday. She'd been avoiding Edmund's desk drawer for 3 years. Not because she didn't know it was there. She knew exactly where it was. She'd walked past it every day, opened the wrong drawer twice by accident, closed it again, and told herself she'd get to it when she was ready. She was not ready on Thursday, but the bank had sent another notice. Formal this time, the kind with official seals and language that meant someone, somewhere, had made a decision. She needed to understand the full shape of her situation. All of it. No more manageable situations. She opened the drawer. Receipts, letters. A photograph she knew was there and looked at for only a second before setting aside. Edmund's handwriting in a notebook. Columns of numbers. His accounting in that cramped, careful script she'd loved and teased him about. And underneath all of that, a letter. Not Edmund's handwriting on the outside. Someone else's. Formal, precise penmanship. The kind that suggested education and deliberateness. She opened it. Read it again. Victor Aldgate to Edmund Voss. Dated 4 months before Edmund died. A third offer to purchase the Voss property. The third, because she could see now, from Edmund's notation in the margin, that there had been 2 before. This one she hadn't known about. This one with a tone that had shifted from the businesslike courtesy of the earlier letters into something she could only describe as pressure. The Valley consolidation requires your cooperation. The offer I've extended is more than fair given current land values. I urge you to consider the alternatives. Consider the alternatives. Edmund had underlined that, in pencil, hard enough to indent the paper. She read it one more time. She sat very still. The kitchen clock ticked, the wind outside. Harlan's hammer, somewhere near the barn, steady, rhythmic, the sound of someone repairing something. She thought about Edmund's illness, how it came on suddenly, how it moved fast and strange, nothing like the fever illnesses she knew, how the doctor had looked uncomfortable when she'd asked questions, how he'd written cause undetermined in his final report, and then seemed anxious to move the conversation along. She thought about a letter that said, consider the alternatives. She thought about a man who said no, and then got sick, and died in 3 days. She sat with that for a long time. Then she did what she had always done when something threatened to overwhelm her. She stood up. She folded the letter and put it in her apron pocket. She went outside because she needed to do something with her hands, because the alternative was sitting in that kitchen with that letter and that silence, and 3 years of questions she had been too exhausted and too sad to ask. She went to the garden. She pulled weeds, hard, efficiently, her hands working while her mind worked separately. The way they had learned to do. Harlan was at the barn. He saw her come out, looked at her for a moment, then looked away, back to what he was doing. He didn't ask. She was grateful for that later, much later, when the sun was going low and her hands were sore and the garden looked better, and she felt marginally less, like the floor had shifted under her. She went to where he was working and stood there. He looked up. She took the letter from her apron pocket and held it out. He took it, read it again, put it down, and said nothing for a long time. Then, Ed said no to this. 3 times, Nora said. I only knew about one, and then he got sick, and then he got sick. She wasn't saying it directly. Neither was he. Because saying it directly would make it a thing that was true and solid and real, and she wasn't ready for that yet. But they were both looking at the same shape of it. How long ago, he said. Edmund signed the loan 3 months after this letter. Before he died, her voice was careful. I found the loan papers 2 years ago. I thought he'd been desperate. I thought I understood it. She paused. I thought he did it to protect me. Maybe he did, Harlan said. And maybe someone helped him feel like he needed to. The evening was cooling fast. The light on the mountain had gone from gold to something quieter. Aldgate now holds the note directly, she said. He bought it from the bank last month. 45 days until the deadline. Harlan was quiet. This is your problem now too, she said. Flat, not apologizing for it. Just stating it. You didn't sign up for it. I know that. He looked at her. A man who lives in the mountains, he said slowly, learns something about being caught between things. Between seasons. Between the weather and the shelter. He paused. You learn that the way out of being caught is usually through it. Not around it. She looked at him. I'm saying I'm not leaving, he said. If you were wondering, she hadn't been going to ask. But she'd been wondering. All right, she said. Then tomorrow we start figuring out what we have to work with. She picked up the letter, folded it back into her pocket, and went inside to start supper. Outside, the last light left the ridge. Then the dark came down. Victor Aldgate came on a Friday. He came the way Victor Aldgate did everything, with impeccable timing and the appearance of great reasonableness. His coat was expensive. His horse was expensive. The 2 men with him were Hutchins and a ranch hand whose name Nora had never bothered to learn, because learning his name would imply a permanence she didn't want to grant him. Nora was in the garden. She heard horses. She stood up slowly. She did not run her hands through her hair or straighten her apron. She just turned and waited. Nora, Aldgate said. He used her given name like he had a right to it, which he did not, and had never been given permission to, which he knew, and which meant the use of it was deliberate. We've been concerned about you, have you? This situation, he gestured broadly, encompassing the ranch, the absence of any visible hired help, the general state of things, a woman managing alone. It's a great deal to ask of anyone. I manage fine, Nora said. Thank you for the concern. I've heard you have a helper. He said the word carefully, like it was in quotes. The man from the auction. Mr. Briggs works for me. Yes, Nora. He dismounted. She noticed the way he did it, unhurried, deliberate, the move of a man signaling that he intended to stay for a while. I'm prepared to make this very simple for you. The note comes due in 45 days. I think we both know the ranch can't cover it. I'll retire the debt completely and give you fair market value on top of that. He spread his hands. Generous, reasonable. You could go back east. Your family. My family is in Ohio, Nora said. I moved here 12 years ago because this is where I chose to be. It's still where I choose to be. The choice becomes more complicated when the bank. The note is yours now, not the bank's, she said. We both know that. So let's not pretend this is about the bank. Something moved in Aldgate's face. Small. Recalculating. You've been reading Edmund's papers, he said. Edmund's papers are mine, she said. They were always mine. I just wasn't ready to read them until now. A beat. Hutchins shifted in his saddle. And then Harlan came around the side of the barn. He wasn't running. He never ran unless there was a reason. He just walked, that mountain ease, efficient and entirely unhurried, and stopped at the garden fence, leaning on the post slightly, tools in his hand from whatever he'd been doing. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Hutchins. Hutchins went very still, because Hutchins had been there that day on the trail, when they'd arrested Harlan. He'd been one of the men holding the so-called evidence, and Harlan looking at him now, calmly, steadily, with complete memory in his eyes, was communicating something that didn't require a single word. I remember. I know. And so do you. Aldgate looked at Harlan, then at Nora, and Nora watched the calculation behind those pale eyes update itself. He'd known there was a complication when Nora bought Harlan at the auction. He understood better now. What kind? Think about my offer, Aldgate said, pleasantly. 45 days passes faster than you'd expect, he remounted, neat controlled. Good afternoon, Nora. He rode away. Hutchins followed without looking back. The third man followed Hutchins. Nora and Harlan watched the dust they raised settle slowly back to earth. He knows, Nora said. Yes, that you know. Yes. She looked at the road. Is that good or bad? Both, Harlan said. A man who thinks you don't know stays hidden. A man who knows you know has to decide whether to keep hiding or to move. He set the tools down against the fence post. Aldgate will move, which means he'll make choices under pressure instead of patience, and people make mistakes under pressure. Everyone does. Nora looked at him. You've been thinking about men like Aldgate for a long time, she said. Men like Aldgate, he said, are why I spent 18 years in the mountains. The evening was coming on, the light on the ridge doing what it always did at this hour. Going warm before going dark. Come inside, Nora said. I'll make coffee. We need to talk about what 45 days actually means. He came. And the door closed behind them both. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Redstone Gap to decide it had an opinion about the situation at the Voss Ranch. 3 weeks. Which, considering the town's usual speed at forming opinions about things that weren't its business, was actually restraint. The opinions arrived in the usual ways. Conversations that stopped when Nora walked into Bradley's general store. Women who found reasons to be looking at something else. Men who had known Edmund Voss for a decade suddenly discovering they had pressing matters on the far side of the street. It was fine. She told herself it was fine. She'd been the widow everyone pitied for 3 years. Being the widow everyone talked about was at least a change of pace. The routine had its own logic now. Before sunrise, Harlan was already moving. She'd hear it sometimes. The barn door, the horses settling, the particular sound of someone who knew how to start a day without making a production of it. By the time she had the stove lit and the coffee going, he'd have already done an hour's work. She started making 2 cups automatically. She didn't think about this too hard. Morning, heavy work, fence lines, structure. The drainage problem near the house foundation that Harlan had identified in the first week and was now systematically correcting one section at a time. She tended the garden, the animals, the house, the 100 small things that held a working ranch together. They worked near each other often, not always side by side, but in earshot, in view, with the awareness of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms without quite deciding to. Midday, they ate together. She'd made this a rule from day 2. Said it plainly. Said it because it was right, not because she needed to examine why it felt right. You eat at the table, not in the barn. That's how it works here, he hadn't argued. He also, she noticed, always waited until she sat before he sat. Never mentioned it. Just did it. Every single time. Evening the porch. Coffee again sometimes. Sometimes just the cooling air and the light going off the mountain. Sometimes conversation. Sometimes not. The silence between them had become the comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't need filling. She taught him more reading. He worked through Thomas Gray's essays with the same methodical attention he gave everything. Slow. Thorough. Asking the right questions. He taught her things that couldn't be found in any book she owned. That cloud formation on the left ridge, he said one evening. Not looking up from the page. Rain in 2 days. Maybe 3. She looked at the clouds. How? The way they stack. The color at the base. He turned a page. Your garden's going to be happy. She looked at the clouds for another moment. Show me. Tomorrow. Show me what you see. He looked up then. All right, he said. Just that, but he was already at the porch before sunrise the next morning, pointing at the eastern sky, telling her what to look for. And she stood beside him in the cold early air and looked at the sky the way she'd never looked at it before. It rained on the second day. Right on schedule. She didn't say you were right, because he already knew, and she didn't want to be the kind of person who made a big thing of small victories. But she looked at him over her coffee cup, and he looked back, and neither of them said anything, because some things don't need to be said. Victor Aldgate was a patient man. This was the thing about him that made him dangerous. Not the money, though the money helped. Not the connections, though the connections were extensive. The patience. He'd been building toward owning this valley for 11 years. He could wait another 40 days for a widow's timetable to expire. But patience doesn't mean stillness. It means moving in ways people don't notice until it's too late. The first thing Nora noticed was Bradley's store. She went in on a Tuesday for flour and salt. Normal order. She'd been buying from Bradley's for 12 years. Bradley himself was behind the counter, a round, uncomfortable man who had never been actively unkind to her and who now wouldn't quite meet her eyes. I'm sorry. Mrs. Voss. The flowers on back order. She looked at the shelf behind him. The shelf that had flour on it, is it, she said. The particular grade you use? Yes. She bought what she could, which was less than she needed. The blacksmith was too busy to look at the plow coupling. The feed merchant could only spare half the usual order. The bank. The bank was apologetic, impeccably apologetic, in the specific way of institutions that are about to do something unkind and want to make sure you understand it isn't personal. None of them were Aldgate's name. They didn't need to. She came home on that Tuesday with half the supplies she'd gone for and a very specific kind of fury in her chest. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that settles in and starts making calculations. Harlan was at the gate when she pulled up. He looked at the wagon, at what was in it. At her face. He didn't ask. He unhitched Bess and led her to the barn. Nora sat on the wagon seat for a moment. Just a moment. Then she climbed down and went inside and started supper. Because the supper still needed making. Because Aldgate was not going to take that from her too. That evening, she told him. She laid it out the way she did everything, clearly. Without drama, the supply situation, the bank's position, the 24 days that had become 22. He's cutting you off, Harlan said. He's cutting us off, she said. He looked at her. You're here, she said simply. That makes it us. Unless you have a different opinion. He didn't. He wants you isolated, Harlan said. Makes the deadline feel worse than it is. Makes you feel more alone. Does he know? She said. That feeling alone is something I've already survived. No, Harlan said. I don't think he does. And for a moment, just a moment, something moved across his face that wasn't analysis or strategy, just steadiness. Directed at her. For her, she looked at her coffee cup, the Sundqvists. She said, Gunnar and Sigrid, 2 miles north. Good people. They've been here 30 years. If anyone in this valley knows Aldgate's patterns, it's them. She went to the Sundqvists on a Wednesday. Sigrid met her at the door before she'd knocked, which was Sigrid's way. The woman had some kind of internal alarm for company. possibly supernatural, possibly just the hearing of someone who'd raised 6 children in a house with thin walls. "Nora," Sigrid said, "come in. I made too much coffee again." Sigrid always made too much coffee. It was a philosophy more than an accident. Gunnar Sundqvist was at the kitchen table, mending harness. And Nora felt that in her chest, the sight of it, because Edmund had mended harness at their kitchen table too, and some things reach across loss and grab you before you're ready. "Sit," Gunnar said, not unkindly. The way a man says sit who means it is welcome. She sat, she told them. Not everything, but enough. Gunnar was quiet for a long while after she finished. He had the particular stillness of a man who'd learned to think before speaking, and meant it as respect. "Not distance, Aldgate," he said finally. "Not a question." "Yes." "We've watched him 11 years, Sigrid said. She set a cup in front of Nora. 3 families gone from the valley in that time, all sold cheap. All had some reason to be, what is the word, motivated to sell quickly. Did they?" Nora looked at her coffee. Edmund wouldn't sell. Gunnar and Sigrid exchanged a look. The kind between people who have been married long enough that whole conversations fit inside a glance. "We know," Gunnar said. "We knew Edmund," a pause, "and we know," Sigrid said carefully, "that Edmund's illness was sudden." Nobody said the word. "Nobody needed to. The man staying at your place," Gunnar said. "Harlan Briggs?" "Yes, I know him," Gunnar said. "Good man, quiet. But the kind of quiet that comes from seeing a great deal. Not from having nothing to say." "Yes," Nora said. "That's him exactly." Sigrid looked at Nora for a moment longer than the conversation required. Nora looked back. "What?" Nora said. "Nothing," Sigrid said, in the voice of a woman who means several things by nothing. Gunnar coughed. "What can we do?" he said to Nora. "Practical. Direct, the way good people offer help. Not flowery, not performative, just, what do you need?" "For now," Nora said, "just know what's happening. And if things get worse, be willing to say so." "To whoever needs to hear it, a circuit judge," Gunnar said. "That's the hope," he nodded slowly. "We can do that." Sigrid put her hand on Nora's. Briefly. Just that. And Nora, who had been managing alone for so long that small kindnesses landed like something much larger, pressed her lips together for a moment, then picked up her coffee and drank. Tobias came on a Thursday. Tobias Cole was 19, doctor's son. Bright-eyed in the specific way of young people who ask questions adults have agreed not to ask, which made him simultaneously valuable and exhausting. He tied his horse at the gate and walked up to the house, like someone who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was now slightly less certain about it. Harlan was on the roof of the barn, replacing shingles. He looked down at the visitor. Tobias looked up. "Mr. Briggs." Harlan kept working. "I overheard something," Tobias said, looking up, shielding his eyes from the sun, "at my father's office. Yesterday." "You make a habit of overhearing things at your father's office. Only the important ones." Harlan set down the hammer. He came down from the roof with the economy of movement that still caught Nora slightly off guard every time she saw it. The ease of a man who'd been climbing things since he was a child and had never stopped. He stood in front of Tobias, not threatening, just present. "Tell me," he said. Tobias told him. Aldgate had been in the doctor's office, with Hutchins. They hadn't known. Tobias was in the back room organizing his father's supply cabinet, which was something he did every Thursday, which was a thing Aldgate apparently did not know. Aldgate wasn't just waiting on the debt deadline. He was talking to people about Harlan. Specific people. The Harmon brothers, who ran cattle drives through the valley, and had a history of being available for the kinds of tasks that couldn't be listed on an invoice. He used the word remove, Tobias said. He was trying to be steady about it, not entirely succeeding. He said the mountain man was a loose thread, and loose threads get cut, Harlan said. "Silence. How sure are you?" Harlan said. "I heard what I heard," Tobias said, with some spirit. "I'm not stupid, Mr. Briggs." "I know what that means. I know you're not stupid," Harlan said. "That's why I'm asking." Tobias steadied himself. "I'm sure." Harlan nodded once. He looked at the mountain, at the ridge where he'd spent 18 years, learning to read danger before it arrived. At the territory he knew better than any man in this county. "Thank you," he said. "What are you going to do?" Tobias asked. "Tell Mrs. Voss," Harlan said, "and then we'll figure out what comes next." "I want to help," Tobias said. Harlan looked at him, really looked. 19 years old, earnest, scared. "Doing it anyway. Come back tomorrow." Harlan said, "Bring whatever access you have to the county records office." Tobias blinked. "I can get in there. Pa has a patient who works the filing desk." "Good. Come back tomorrow." She took it quietly. That was the thing about Nora. She didn't perform her reactions. She listened to what Harlan told her. She asked 2 questions. She was quiet for a while. Then, he was going to wait for the deadline. He's not waiting anymore. Something changed. Or he got impatient. Same thing. She looked at her hands. He knows we know something. About Edmund. About the horse. A pause. He can't afford to wait 3 more weeks for a legal outcome when there's a chance we use that time against him. Yes. So he wants you gone first. Yes, she looked up at him. You could leave. Genuinely. Go back to the mountains. He has no reason to follow you up there. No, Harlan said. I'm not asking you to. No, he said again. Quieter. Absolutely certain. She looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said. She stood up. Went to the mantel, came back with the shotgun, set it on the table. Then we do this carefully, she said. Every night from here on. Doors locked. Lamp out early so he can't see who's where from the road. She looked at him. And you don't go anywhere alone. Not until this is over. He looked at the shotgun, then at her. You're not afraid, he said. Not accusing. Just noting I'm terrified, she said. That's different from afraid. Terrified means you know exactly what could go wrong. Afraid means you don't do anything about it. He was very still for a moment. Edmund taught you that, he said. Edmund lived that, she said. I just paid attention. The nights got harder to navigate after that, not because of the danger. Because of the awareness. She'd hear him moving. Late. Not the normal settling sounds of the barn, but the specific cadence of someone keeping watch. He'd taken to walking the perimeter before he slept. Quietly. Methodically. The way a man does when he's calculated a threat and decided how to manage it. She knew because she watched from her window sometimes. She told herself she was checking that everything was all right. She was not entirely honest with herself about this. The thing was, and this was the thing she had to keep setting aside, like a book you keep picking up and then putting down because you're not sure you're ready for it. The thing was that she'd gotten used to him. Not in the way you get used to a piece of furniture or a habit, in the way you get used to something that was missing from a room and has now been present long enough that the absence would be wrong. Stop it, she told herself. Regularly, he works here. You respect him. That's the whole of it. Except the way he looked up from whatever he was doing. Every time. She came outside. Not startled, like he'd already known she was coming. Except the second coffee cup. Except the way he'd moved to stand between her and Aldgate that day. Not because she'd asked. Because he'd simply decided that was where he was supposed to be. Except the night he'd said, I'm not leaving. And his voice had had something in it that wasn't just practicality. Stop it, she told herself. She was 32 years old, and she had 18 days before she lost everything Edmund had built, and this was not the time to be noticing things. She noticed things anyway. He told her about his mother on a Tuesday night. It was raining. The rain Harlan had predicted 6 days ago arrived exactly when he'd said it would, which she was still not entirely over. They were on the porch with the roof over them and the rain coming down off the eaves in a steady curtain. The garden was going to be very happy. She'd asked about his mother before. He'd answered around it. Not evasively, more like a man choosing the right moment. And the right moment hadn't been until now. Her name was Stillwater. He said, my father's name for her. Her Shoshone name was longer. I won't say it out here. It's not a name for outside the family. She nodded. She understood that. Some things have the right container and the wrong one. She knew plants, he said. Which ones healed? Which ones harmed? Which ones you could eat, and which ones just looked like you could? He was looking at the rain. She taught me to read the land as a conversation. Not something to survive. Something to talk to, and your father. He taught me to build things. To fix things. A pause. He used to say, a man who can build what he needs and fix what he has will never be truly poor. His voice went quieter on that last sentence, like he was setting something down carefully. He wasn't entirely right, but it was good advice. What happened to him? Lung sickness. Winter. I was 12. She was quiet, letting him find the shape of what came next. After that, I went full to the village. My mother's people. It was where I learned most of what I know. He paused. And then the mission school, just those words. He didn't add anything. He didn't need to. How old? 14. She pressed her lips together, said nothing. Because sometimes saying nothing is the right thing. 3 years, he said. I came back and the village had been relocated. My mother was at the agency 3 counties east. She sent word through her sister that I shouldn't come. Didn't want me on the agency rolls. His hands were still on the porch rail. Didn't want me trapped. The rain came down. Is she? I don't know, he said. I sent letters 3 years ago. No answer. A pause. Either she didn't get them or I don't know. The space that left open, Nora sat with it. And with him. I'm sorry, she said. The real kind. Not the filling silence kind. Tell me something about Edmund, he said. Something you haven't told anyone, she thought. He was afraid of geese, she said. A beat, geese, specifically geese, not other birds. He'd faced down a good amount of hard things in his life, and a goose could send him over a fence. Harlan looked at her. I asked him once. She said. He said, very seriously. And Edmund was a serious man. When he'd decided something was worth being serious about, he said. I've never met a goose that didn't have bad intentions, Nora. Not once. That's not an animal. That's a grievance with feathers. Harlan made a sound. Not quite a laugh. But close. The precursor to one. He sounds like a man who paid attention, Harlan said. He was, she said. That's exactly what he was. She looked at the rain. He would have liked you, she said. Before she'd decide to say it, Harlan looked at her. He would have asked you about the mountains for about 3 hours, she said. And then he would have asked if you wanted to stay for dinner, which was Edmund's way of saying, you're good company, and I'd like more of it. And what would you have said? Harlan asked. If he'd asked, she looked at the rain. I would have said yes, she said, obviously, and Harlan Briggs. Mountain man, person of very few unnecessary words, said nothing at all, but his shoulder was slightly closer to hers than it had been a moment ago. And neither of them moved away. The fire started at 4 in the morning. Nora was asleep. She was a light sleeper. 3 years alone will do that. But even so, she almost missed it. What woke her was the smell, smoke on the wind. And then, immediately, before she was fully awake, Harlan's voice outside, not shouting, never shouting, but close enough to her window that she heard it. Nora, fire at the Caldwells. Get dressed. She was at the window in seconds. He was already saddled. She dressed faster than she had in years. Pulled on her boots without sitting down, grabbed her coat off the hook, and was outside in less than 3 minutes. He had Bess ready for her. They didn't speak. There wasn't time, and there was nothing to say. The eastern sky told them everything. The orange that didn't belong there, the black column rising against the pre-dawn dark. She had not been to the Caldwell farm more than twice, since Marcus Caldwell had said things about Harlan, in front of 3 other men 2 weeks ago. Things she had not repeated to Harlan, because she didn't see the purpose. Harlan had heard about them anyway. Small towns. He hadn't said anything about it. He was riding toward that man's burning farm right now. Without hesitation, she pushed Bess harder. The barn was fully involved by the time they arrived. The heat was the first thing, a wall of it. Even at 50 yards it pressed against the skin. Marcus Caldwell was in the yard, his wife Helen beside him, holding their two older children against her sides. Marcus was being held back by his farmhand, a boy of about 17, who was using both arms and all his weight and barely managing, because Marcus was trying to get to the barn, because his youngest daughter, Ruby, 7 years old, had been sleeping in the hayloft. She'd gone up after supper the way children do, dragging a blanket, saying she wanted to sleep where the horses sleep. They'd let her, the way you do. Because children ask impossible things and sometimes they're just adorable about it. And now the barn was burning. Ruby! Marcus was screaming it, over and over, the particular sound of a parent facing the specific worst thing. My baby is in there. Nora was off Bess before the mare had fully stopped. She looked at the barn, at the fire, at the structure, reading it the way Harlan had taught her, without quite knowing he was teaching her. Where the fire was hottest, where it wasn't yet. She looked for Harlan. He was already gone. She saw him at the edge of the structure, moving along the side, not toward the front door. The front door was an entrance to a furnace. Moving along the side, fast, looking at the wood, at the gaps, at the places where the fire hadn't reached yet. He found one. She saw him go through it. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Marcus Caldwell stopped fighting his farmhand. He'd seen it too. Everyone had stopped. The fire roared. A section of the loft floor was visible through the gaps in the burning siding, beginning to give. The main beam over the center of the barn was already charring. Don't, Nora thought. Not a prayer exactly. Just everything she had, directed at that barn. Don't you dare. 40 seconds, me baby, 50. The longest minute of her life, and she had lived through the 3 days of Edmund's dying, so that was saying something. And then, Harlan came out of the gap in the back wall. Low, moving fast. One arm wrapped around a small figure with a blanket over her head. The child was coughing. Harlan's shirt was smoking at the shoulder. His left arm had a burn on it. She could see from 20 feet away. He made it 15 yards. The main beam gave. The center of the barn came down in a cascade of burning wood and sparks that lit the night like a terrible celebration. And Harlan Briggs was outside of it, on his knees in the dirt, setting Ruby Caldwell down with the care of a man who has been carrying something precious and is only now allowing himself to set it down. She breathes, he said. To anyone. To everyone scared. Not hurt bad. Helen Caldwell made a sound Nora would never be able to describe. She ran. Gathered her daughter from the ground. Went to her knees and stayed there, her whole body wrapped around the child, both of them coughing, both of them alive. Marcus Caldwell stood very still. He looked at Ruby, at his wife, at the burning barn, at Harlan, who was still on his knees, who had a burned arm and a singed shirt and was breathing hard in the way of someone whose lungs have taken in more smoke than was wise. Marcus Caldwell walked toward him. And then Marcus Caldwell, who had said things 2 weeks ago that Nora had not repeated, went to one knee in the dirt in front of Harlan Briggs. My daughter is alive, Marcus said. His voice was completely wrecked. Because of you. Harlan didn't say anything. I said things, Marcus said. About you. I said them in front of men I had no business saying them in front of. He stopped. I was wrong. I was wrong about you. And I'm saying it now because I don't know another way to. No debt, Harlan said. His voice was rough from the smoke. Neighbors else looked at him. Neighbors, he said, like the word was something new. Yes, a pause. Marcus Caldwell put out his hand. Harlan looked at it, then took it. The handshake lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do. Then Harlan stood up, and Marcus stood up, and Nora was there with her hand on Harlan's arm, the unburned one. And she was looking at the burn on his left arm and trying to be practical about it, and not at all succeeding at being only practical about it. We need to tend to that, she said, low. For him, it's fine. It is not fine. I can see it from here, Nora. Don't, she said. Don't tell me it's fine. Just come here, he came. Because some arguments Harlan Briggs had apparently decided not to have. Tobias found the evidence at first light. He'd come running when he saw the smoke from town. Tobias being the kind of young man who ran toward rather than away, and had stayed quietly, usefully, through the chaos of the bucket lines and the collapse and the aftermath. Now he was at the back of the burned barn. He called for her quietly. "Mrs. Voss," she went. He showed her what he'd found, a piece of fabric, caught on a nail at the back corner of the structure, at the point where the fire had clearly started. The particular color and weave of it, she'd seen that exact fabric at close range, in the deputy's office, on Reeves's uniform coat, and beside it, in the soft soil where the rain had settled 2 days ago and then dried to a perfect recording surface. A boot print, clear, complete, the heel distinctly worn on the left side. She'd seen Reeves's boots. The left heel was worn. She looked at Tobias. He looked at her. "Aldgate's man," Tobias said. "Not a question. Get something to cover that print," she said quietly. "Don't let anyone walk near it. And don't tell anyone yet what you found." Tobias moved. She stood at the corner of the ruined barn and looked at a piece of fabric and a boot print, and felt something solidify inside her. Not rage. Rage was too hot and too fast for this. Something colder, more certain. He'd burned down a family's barn. He'd risked a 7-year-old child. Because the Caldwells hadn't sold when he wanted them to, or because he needed a crisis to distract from the approaching deadline. Or because men like Aldgate, when they feel the ground shifting under them, reach for the matches. She went back to where Harlan was letting her wrap his arm with strips from her apron. The apron she'd had for 10 years, the one she'd been going to rehem eventually, and now appeared to have other purposes. And she told him quietly what Tobias had found. He didn't react outwardly, but his hand, resting on the table, went flat, deliberate. The way a man holds himself very still when what he's hearing requires it. "He's accelerating," Harlan said. "Yes. He knows the evidence is building against him. Yes. Which means he's going to move on the ranch before the deadline. Yes." She tied off the bandage. "Which means we need to move first." He looked at her. "Reeves," she said, "the deputy. That was his coat. His boot?" She paused. "Which means Reeves either did this willingly or did it under pressure." "Pressure," Harlan said. "Reeves has a wife. 2 children in school. How do you know that?" "Because I pay attention." She looked at him. "A man under pressure," Harlan said slowly, "who has a family to protect and a conscience he hasn't entirely abandoned. That man is eventually going to break one way or the other." He paused. "We need to make sure he breaks the right way. Can we get to him before Aldgate does?" "I think he might get to us," Harlan said. He was right. He was right about everything, which was occasionally irritating and generally reassuring. Reeves came to the ranch 2 days later. Evening. Alone, no uniform. His horse tied at the gate, and him walking up the path with his hat in his hands. The way a man walks when he's going somewhere. His pride didn't want to go, and his conscience overruled his pride. Nora saw him from the kitchen window. She went to the door, Deputy Reeves, Mrs. Voss. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Didn't come up. Like he wasn't sure he'd been invited that far. "I need to speak with Mr. Briggs. If he's willing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." He sat at the table with both hands around the cup like a man who needed something solid to hold. Harlan sat across from him. Nora sat at the end. Reeves talked. He talked for a long time. About 3 years of looking the other way. About the things he'd told himself. About his family and his fears and the arithmetic of a man who decides that keeping quiet is the same as keeping safe. He talked about Edmund Voss. He said it directly. He looked at Nora when he said it. He didn't flinch away from her eyes, and she gave him that, the not flinching. He hadn't done it himself. He needed her to know that. But he'd known. He'd known it wasn't a natural illness, and he'd written up the report the way Aldgate's man suggested, and he'd told himself it was. He'd told himself a lot of things. He stopped talking. The kitchen was very quiet, "The fire at the Caldwells," he said finally. "That was the line for me." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "A child was in that barn. Ruby Caldwell is 7 years old and she almost—" He stopped. "I set that fire. I was ordered to and I did it, and I will spend the rest of my life." He stopped again. Nora was very still. "Why are you here?" Harlan said. Not unkind, just direct. "Because I have documents," Reeves said. "Records I kept. Because some part of me always knew I'd need them. Or that someday someone would." He looked at Harlan. "Records of Aldgate's vault instructions. Financial records he made me move through different accounts. Records of who was at which properties when." He paused. "Records about Edmund Voss." Silence. "What do you want in exchange?" Harlan said, looked at him. "Not to be the man I've been," he said. "That's all. I can't undo what I did. But I can stop doing it." Harlan held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Once, bring the documents," he said. "We have a circuit judge to reach. 22 days left." The kitchen table at the Voss Ranch had become a different kind of place. Not the quiet table of two people finding their rhythm. A working table. Tobias with the county records he'd pulled. Reeves with his documents. Organized with the guilt-driven thoroughness of a man trying to do in 3 days what he'd avoided for 3 years. Nora with Edmund's papers, cross-referencing. Harlan reading everything and saying little and occasionally pointing at a specific document and saying, "There, that connects to this." Gunnar and Sigrid Sundqvist arrived on the second day without being asked. Gunnar looked at the table, at the papers, at the faces. "What can we do?" he said. They were there every day after that. Sigrid organized. She had a system. She always had a system. And within an hour the documents were sorted and cross-referenced in a way that made considerably more sense than the arrangement they'd had before. 30 years in this valley," she said, not looking up from the papers. "Aldgate thinks he's the only one who is paying attention." She set one document on top of another with the satisfying precision of a woman making a point. He was not the only one paying attention. 20 days. And then Reverend Dodd came. He came on a Sunday, which was either appropriate or ironic, depending on how you looked at it. He came alone. He came the way he did everything, with a great deal of visible intention and slightly less conviction underneath it. He knocked. Nora answered. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "I wonder if I might speak with you." She looked at him for a moment. "Come in," she said. He came in. He saw the table. He saw the documents. He saw Harlan, who looked up and said nothing, which was somehow louder than saying something. Dodd sat. He held his hat. "I want to say," he started. Stopped. "I want to tell you that the night I came here with those men." He stopped again. "Go on," Nora said. "I was afraid," he said simply. "Not of him," he nodded at Harlan. "Of Aldgate. Of what would happen to my congregation if I—" He pressed his lips together. "That is not a sufficient reason." "I know that." Harlan looked at him. "Why are you here?" "Because my congregation goes to the general store," Dodd said. "Because they talk to the banker. Because they talk to each other." He looked at the documents on the table. "Because Aldgate has been using my pulpit. Using the language of my faith. And I have been letting him." Silence. "I can speak to people," Dodd said. "I can stop speaking to them the way he wants me to." He looked at Harlan directly. "I cannot undo what I said. I can say different things going forward." Harlan held the man's gaze for a long moment. "Then, that's a start." It wasn't forgiveness. Harlan Briggs wasn't the kind of man who offered forgiveness on behalf of history. But it was something. Dodd left with a straighter spine than he'd arrived with. Nora watched him go. "You're more patient than I am," she said. "No," Harlan said. "I'm just further past the anger." She looked at him. "It doesn't go away," he said. "You just learn where to put it." She thought about that for the rest of the evening. 18 days. She found him on the porch after midnight. She'd woken to the house sounds and then realized something was different. Not wrong. Just he wasn't in the barn. The light wasn't there. She went to the door. He was sitting on the porch steps, looking at the mountain. The way he sometimes did, like he was checking in with it. She sat beside him. Not next to him, right beside him. Shoulders almost touching. Can't sleep, she said, thinking. About the case, no, a pause. About what happens after. She looked at the mountain. If it works. If Aldgate goes down and the ranch is clear, and the deadline passes, yes, what happens after? He was quiet for a moment. That depends, he said, on things I don't know yet. She looked at him. He was looking at the mountain, not at her, but she could see the side of his face in the dark, and what was on it. Wasn't strategy or calculation. Harlan, she said. He turned and she was looking at him, very directly. The way she looked at things she needed to see clearly. I know what I want to happen after, she said. I'm not going to say it right now because we have 18 days left and I need to keep my head clear, but I want you to know that I know. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said, quiet, not dismissive, just receiving it, holding it carefully. All right, she said. They sat on the porch steps in the dark. The mountain was just a mountain, dark and quiet and old. Neither of them needed it to be anything else tonight. 15 days. The document package was nearly complete. Reeves's records. The county land filings Tobias had pulled. Edmund's papers. The coroner's notation, which Tobias's father, the doctor, had agreed to clarify in writing with considerable visible relief, like a man who'd been waiting for permission to say a true thing for 3 years. And the boot print. Tobias had made a careful drawing of it, to scale, with measurements, which matched the measurements of Reeves's boot, which Reeves had confirmed in writing because at this point Reeves was committed. They needed a circuit judge, a real one, outside Aldgate's reach. Gunner had a contact in the next county, a man named Harwell, old, impatient, impervious apparently to being managed. He'll come if we send the right letter, Gunner said. How do you know, Nora said. Because I've met him. And because he once told me, the only thing that genuinely offends him is a man who thinks the law is a tool for his own benefit. Perfect, Nora said. She wrote the letter that evening. Harlan read it, made 2 small suggestions. She made the changes. It went out the next morning with Tobias writing, because Tobias was fast and motivated, and had nothing to lose and everything to prove. 10 days. They were in the barn, late afternoon. She was helping him finish the last section of roof, holding boards while he nailed, which was the most useful she could be, and she'd long since made peace with that. I've been thinking about the mountain, she said. The high camp you had. You said Aldgate's men burned it? Yes. You'll want to rebuild it, eventually. He looked down at her. Eventually, I'm not asking you to stay, she said carefully. I want to understand. What you want. After, he hammered a nail. Hammered another. I told you once, he said, that I went to the mountains because no one ran me out of them. Yes, that's a different reason from wanting to be there. She was quiet. I've been there 18 years, he said. I know the mountains. I know how to live in them. He looked at the horizon, at the ridge where his camp had been. But knowing how to live somewhere and wanting to live somewhere are not the same thing. She looked up at him. He was looking at her. I know where I want to be, he said. She held his gaze. 10 more days, she said. 10 more days, he agreed. He went back to the roof. She held the next board. 10 more days, that was all. 9 days. That's what was left when Judge Harwell's letter arrived. Tobias brought it. Riding fast. Hat gone somewhere on the road. Face flushed. Holding the envelope up before he'd even pulled his horse to a full stop. Like a man carrying news too important to wait for proper dismounting procedures. Nora took it from his hand. Read it on the porch. Read it again. He's coming, she said. Harlan was at the fence. He looked up. When? 6 days, which meant 3 days before the deadline, which meant Aldgate would know, which meant the next 6 days were going to be the most dangerous ones yet. She folded the letter, put it in her apron pocket, looked at the mountain. All right, she thought. All right, then. The thing about Victor Aldgate was that he'd spent 11 years being the smartest man in every room. And he was smart. A stupid man doesn't build what he'd built. A careless man doesn't hold a whole valley in the palm of his hand for a decade without anyone being able to prove it. But smart men have a specific vulnerability. They start believing their own intelligence is the only intelligence in the room. They stop accounting for what they can't see. He hadn't seen Reeves breaking. He hadn't seen Tobias in that back room. He hadn't seen the Sundqvists keeping 30 years of careful records about land transactions in the valley because Gunnar Sundqvist was a methodical man who believed in writing things down. He hadn't seen Nora Voss opening her husband's desk drawer. And he couldn't have seen, what Harlan Briggs kept in his head. What 18 years of living in those mountains meant, in terms of knowing exactly who moved, where, and when. What a man who'd been watching the valley from above remembered. What he could place an exact time and location when asked, because nobody had asked him yet. Nobody had thought to. 6 days before the hearing, Aldgate made his move. Not in the dark this time, in daylight. Which was worse, in a way. The dark at least has the honesty of admitting it's trying to hide something. 4 riders came up the road to the Voss ranch at mid-morning. Not Hutchins, not ranch hands. The Harmon brothers, both of them, and 2 men Nora didn't recognize, big men. The kind who get hired for a specific category of work that doesn't get written in ledgers. Harlan saw them from the barn roof. He came down. He was at the gate before Nora got to the porch. She was right behind him with the shotgun, which she had stopped leaving inside because this was not the season for leaving things inside. Jim Harmon was older, 40, maybe, with the look of a man who'd made a series of small, bad decisions over many years, until the small ones stopped being small. Pete was younger and meaner, in the direct, uncomplicated way of people who haven't developed the patience for subtlety. Jim looked at Harlan. Harlan looked back. Aldgate wants the woman off the property. Today, Aldgate doesn't own this property, Nora said. Not yet. Not for 6 more days. He says the arrangement's been accelerated. Then he can take it up with Judge Harwell, she said, who arrives in 6 days, and who has been sent a complete accounting of everything Aldgate has done in this valley for the past 11 years. Jim Harmon went still. Pete looked at his brother. The 2 men they'd brought shifted in their saddles. I'd think carefully, Harlan said. His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that's louder than most things. About what you do in the next 60 seconds. About whether Aldgate is worth what comes after. He wasn't threatening. Not exactly. He was just being clear. There is a difference. One of the 2 unnamed men looked at Harlan for a long moment, then looked at the ground, then looked at Jim Harmon. Jim. I wasn't told it was this kind of situation. What kind of situation did you think it was? Jim said tightly. Not the kind where a circuit judge is 6 days out. We're leaving, the man said. To Harlan. To Nora. Not apologizing, exactly. But leaving, which in the circumstances was sufficient. He turned his horse. The second unnamed man followed without a word. Pete Harmon looked at his brother. Jim Harmon looked at the porch, at Nora with the shotgun, at Harlan at the gate, at the 2 men already turning down the road. He made the calculation that men make when the arithmetic of a situation has shifted past what they'd agreed to. Tell Aldgate that I want a conversation about my agreement before anything else happens. He turned his horse. Pete followed, looking back once. Then, not looking back. And then it was just the road, empty, the dust settling. Nora lowered the shotgun. Her hands were not entirely steady. Harlan came back from the gate and stood beside her. Looking at the road, he's afraid, Harlan said. Good, afraid men do desperate things, I know. She exhaled. 5 more days. 5 more days, he said. He didn't move away. She didn't move away. They stood there until the dust was gone. That night she couldn't eat. She made supper, set it on the table, sat down, looked at it. Harlan ate with his usual methodical steadiness. Looked at her plate. Looked at her. Eat, he said. I'm not hungry, eat anyway. She looked at him. You're very free with instructions for a man who works for me. You hired labor, I'm providing it. Eat. She picked up her fork, which was, she realized mid-bite, staring at her beans, probably what he'd intended. Give her something to push back against so she'd stop spiraling and do the thing her body needed. She looked at him. He was looking at his food, not at her. But there was something in the set of his mouth that was not amusement. You did that on purpose, she said. Did what? Made me argue with you so I'd eat. I have no idea what you're referring to. These are good beans. She stared at him for a moment. Then she ate her beans. Because they were good beans, and because he was right, and because she was not going to give him the satisfaction of saying both of those things out loud. Although, looking at the corner of his mouth, he already knew. 4 days before, the Caldwells came, not to deliver news, not with information, just came. Marcus and Helen and their 3 children, including Ruby, who was carrying something bundled under her arm. Marcus had his hat off before he reached the porch. We heard about yesterday, he said. The writers, word travels fast, Nora said. We wanted you to know, Helen said. That will come if you need us. Both of us. Marcus looked at Harlan, the look of a man paying a debt that can't be paid in currency. Whatever you need, in the next 4 days. We're here. Harlan nodded. And then Ruby Caldwell stepped forward. She was 7. She had the serious demeanor of a child, who has recently had a very significant experience and processed it into a new understanding of how the world works. She looked up at Harlan. I made you something, she said. With great solemnity, she held it out. It was a woven circlet, braided from dried grasses and strips of colored cloth. The cloth from different fabrics, mismatched and imperfect and entirely purposeful. She'd done it herself. You could tell because the weaving was slightly uneven in places and completely beautiful in all of them, Mama said. When someone saves you, Ruby said, you give them something you made yourself, because something you made has a piece of you in it. And they should have a piece of you. Harlan went very still. He crouched down, to her level, the way adults do when they want to be taken seriously by children, and understand that this requires a physical commitment. He held out both hands. Ruby placed the circlet in them. Carefully, like it was important. Because it was. Thank you, he said. His voice was different. Not different in a bad way. Different in the way of someone who has received something they didn't know they needed. Ruby looked at him with those clear, 7-year-old eyes that see everything and filter nothing. You don't have to be scared anymore, she told him. I'll be your guardian angel now, like you were mine. The adults on the porch made various quiet sounds. Nora pressed her fingers to her mouth briefly. Harlan looked at Ruby for a long moment. That, he said, is the best offer I've had in a long time. Ruby nodded, satisfied, then turned and ran back to her mother. Mission accomplished. Harlan straightened slowly. He was looking at the circlet in his hands, and Nora, watching his face, thought, there it is, there's the thing underneath everything else. The part that's still the boy who lost his parents and went to a school that tried to take away his name and came out the other side still holding something essential, even though they'd tried every way they knew to remove it. She thought, somebody should have been his guardian angel a long time ago, she thought. Maybe it's not too late for that to be me. She said none of these things, because 3 days remained, and she needed her head. 3 days. Gunnar arrived at dawn with Sigrid and a crate of documents. Tobias arrived an hour later with 3 additional land records he'd found in a filing folder that had been mislabeled, deliberately or otherwise, for the past 7 years. Reeves came at midday, in uniform this time. Something had changed in him these past days. The stooped quality was less. He'd made his decision and stopped fighting it, and decisions, once genuinely made, have a way of straightening a person. They sat at Nora's kitchen table. All of them. The table that had been built by Edmund Voss. That had hosted 11 years of meals for 2. That had held the weight of a dying ranch, and the papers of a dead man, and the slow rebuilding of something that almost wasn't. Now it held all of this, Harlan spread the document package on the table. Organized. Clean. 3 weeks of Sigrid's ruthless filing. We have the land records, he said, showing the pattern of Aldgate's acquisitions. 3 properties in the last 5 years, all purchased below value, all preceded by some form of pressure or incident. We have Reeves's records, Nora said. Financial movement through accounts. Instructions in writing. We have Dr. Cole's clarification, Tobias said. Careful not to look proud about this because his father was still not entirely speaking to him. About Edmund Voss's cause of death, and we have the boot print, Nora said. And the fabric and, Harlan said. He paused. Everyone looked at him, and I can place Aldgate's rider on the mountain road, he said. The night Edmund Voss got sick. The exact night. I know the man, I know the horse, I know the route and the time. He looked at Nora. I've been in these mountains 18 years. I know what moves through them and when. The table was quiet. Will Harwell take that testimony? Gunnar said carefully. From a man like me, Harlan said. Not with bitterness. Just as a fact that required addressing. Harwell takes testimony from anyone who can demonstrate direct knowledge, Reeves said. I've appeared before him twice. He doesn't care who you are. He cares whether you saw what you say you saw. Then I have what he needs, Harlan said. Nora looked at him. He looked back. This is what you've been holding, she said quietly. This whole time, I didn't know if it would be enough, or if anyone would. It's enough, she said. And someone will. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the table. Let's go through it one more time, he said. From the beginning. Everything in order. Judge Harwell arrived on a Wednesday morning. He was older than Nora had expected. 70, at least. Small. Thin in the way of men who burned everything they ate and had been doing so for 7 decades. He wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had the expression of a man who'd heard every possible version of every possible human failing, and was no longer surprised by any of them. He arrived with a clerk and a court reporter. He did not arrive with ceremony. He walked into the church. The only space in Redstone Gap large enough for what was about to happen. Looked at the pews filling with people. Looked at the table set up at the front. Looked at the documents stacked on it, and said to his clerk, "We'll start in an hour. Get me coffee." That was it. That was Judge Harwell. The church filled. Every pew. Standing at the back. People in the doorway. Redstone Gap had 300 residents, and most of them had decided that whatever happened today, they wanted to see it. Nora sat at the table on the left. Harlan beside her. Reeves beside him. In uniform. Back straight. Tobias in the row behind, because Tobias had been told he was a supporting witness and not a principal party, and he was handling this with approximately 70% grace. The Sunfists sat 3 rows back. Sigrid had her hands folded in her lap with the calm of a woman who had organized the documents and knew where everything was and was prepared for any outcome, because preparation is the cure for anxiety. Marcus and Helen Caldwell sat beside them. Ruby was at home with a neighbor, which was appropriate. But Marcus was here, and he'd come not as a victim but as a witness, which meant something, on the right side of the aisle. Victor Aldgate, his lawyer, a polished man from the county seat named Prescott, who had clearly billed his way through a great number of courtrooms. Hutchins behind them. 3 members of the town council who had been in Aldgate's pocket. Long enough that they'd stopped thinking of it as being in anyone's pocket and had started thinking of it as simply how things worked. Aldgate looked composed. He was always composed. He looked at Nora, nodded slightly, like they were acquaintances at a social event. She looked at him steadily and did not nod back. She did not nod back, because she was looking at him the way you look at something, when you want to make very sure you see it clearly. When you want to remember it exactly as it is, without any of the grace notes that grief or fear or time might add later. She looked at Victor Aldgate and thought, I see you. I know what you did, and I am no longer afraid of you. It was the truest thing she'd felt in 4 years. Harwell called it to order with a single knock of his gavel. Not theatrical. Just, we're starting. Prescott went first. He was good. She'd give him that. He had the skill of men who understand that law is a story. And what matters is which story the room believes. He laid out the debt instrument, the legal standing, the clarity of the contract, the unambiguous timeline. He was almost done. Harwell held up one hand. Just one hand. Prescott stopped. I've read the debt instrument, Harwell said. In the dry, unhurried voice of a man who did not need to perform authority because he had it. I have some questions about the circumstances under which it was signed. The deceased signed this instrument 12 days before his death. His widow was unaware of it. The arrangement was between Mr. Voss and Mr. Aldgate. Prescott said, Mrs. Voss's awareness is not illegal. Mr. Prescott, I'll tell you when I'm done. Prescott sat down. I have here a clarification from the physician who treated Edmund Voss in his final illness, Harwell said. The original death record reads, cause of death, fever. The clarification reads, he found his glasses, put them on. Read symptoms upon review inconsistent with standard febrile presentation. Progression, atypical. Clinical picture consistent with arsenical poisoning. Though definitive determination was not made at time of death, due to lack of investigation, the room made a sound. A collective exhale. Collective tightening. The sound of 200 people understanding something simultaneously. Aldgate's face did not change, which was, in its way, more damning than if it had. Deputy Reeves, Harwell said. Reeves stood. He testified for 22 minutes. He was precise. He was clear. He did not editorialize or excuse. He said what he knew and what he'd done and when he'd done it. He placed documents in the record one by one. He answered questions in the flat, factual voice of a man who has decided that the time for any other kind of voice is over. When he was done, the room was very quiet. Prescott attempted a cross-examination. Harwell let it go on for 14 minutes, then, we'll move on, Your Honor. The deputy's credibility as a witness is, move on, Mr. Prescott. Then Gunnar Sundfist. 30 years of land records and quiet observation, delivered in a Norwegian accent that somehow made every word sound more deliberate, and therefore more credible. He had notes. Of course he had notes. Sigrid had organized them, then Tobias. With the county land filings. Explaining with the focused clarity of a young man who had something to prove and had done his homework. Then Dr. Cole, Tobias's father, who had clearly spent several uncomfortable days preparing for this moment, and was visibly relieved to be saying the true thing after 3 years of not saying it. And then Mr. Briggs, Harwell said. Harlan stood. He walked to the front of the room. He stood in front of 200 people who had variously called him dangerous, half-breed, mountain man, savage, and, more recently, the man who saved Ruby Caldwell. He stood the way he always stood, straight, unhurried, looking at the room with those dark eyes that observed without judgment, because judgment was a thing he reserved for things that had earned it. Tell me what you saw, Harwell said. On the night of October the 14th, 3 years ago, your own words. Take your time? Harlan took a breath, and he spoke not long, not dramatic, just clear, exact. The testimony of a man who had spent 18 years learning to observe precisely and remember accurately, because in the mountains, precision killed you. He'd been camped on the lower ridge, southeast slope. He named the location, specific enough that anyone who knew the territory would know exactly where he meant. He'd seen riders on the valley road below. Late, too late for ordinary travel. He knew the horses. He knew most of the horses in the valley, which was a thing mountain men and horse people had in common, the attention to individual animals. One of them was Aldgate's Black. He'd seen that horse at the trading post 3 times. He knew its gait. He knew how it moved. He gave the time, the direction, the number of riders. 2, he said. Going toward the Voss property, not coming from it, and the time, Harwell said, past midnight. Before 2. I know the stars well enough to place it. And you're certain of the horse? Yes. And you would have said this, Harwell said slowly, at the time. If anyone had asked, no one asked, Harlan said. I was in the mountains. I didn't know what had happened at the Voss property until later. And by then, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. By then, the kind of man he was didn't get asked about things like this. The room understood. You could feel it. The collective understanding. Not comfortable. Not easy. But real. Harwell removed his glasses. He looked at Victor Aldgate. Aldgate met his gaze. Mr. Aldgate, you've heard the testimony presented today. Your counsel may respond. Prescott stood. He was good. He did his job. He challenged Reeves's credibility. He questioned the reliability of memory. He pointed out that none of this, individually, constituted definitive proof of anything. He was technically correct about several things. Harwell listened to all of it. Then, I've heard enough, Your Honor. The defense hasn't had full opportunity to. Mr. Prescott. Harwell's voice had not changed in volume or temperature since he'd arrived. It did not need to. I have practiced law for 43 years. I know when I've heard enough. He picked up his pen. He wrote something on the paper in front of him. The room held its breath. I'm issuing an emergency injunction staying the debt enforcement, he said. Pending a full investigation by this circuit into the circumstances of Edmund Voss's death and the land acquisition patterns of Victor Aldgate in this valley. He looked up. The Voss property remains with its current owner. No transfer of title may occur until the investigation is concluded. He put down the pen. I'm also recommending to the Federal Marshal's office that they open a parallel inquiry. He looked at Aldgate directly, which is my way of saying, Mr. Aldgate, that this is no longer a matter for county jurisdiction. He closed the folder. We're done for today. The sound the room made was not a cheer. It was something older than that. It was the sound of 200 people who had been holding something, fear, maybe, or the exhaustion of pretending not to see what they'd been seeing. Releasing it all at once, Nora sat very still. She had her hands flat on the table. She was looking at those hands. Harlan was beside her. She could feel him there without looking. The warmth of him beside her. The solid fact of him. She heard Aldgate's chair scrape back. She heard Prescott saying something low and urgent. She heard the room coming alive around her. She didn't look up until she felt Harlan's hand cover hers on the table. Just that, his hand over hers. She looked up. He was looking at her, and in his face. In those dark, careful, observant eyes that had watched the valley from above for 18 years, and seen things no one thought to ask about. There was something she recognized. Relief, not his own. Hers, reflected back. He'd been holding his breath for her. Through all of it, she turned her hand under his. Held on. It's not over, she said quietly. The investigation, it could take. I know, he said. Aldgate still has money. Lawyers. I know, this is the beginning, not the Nora, he said. She stopped. I know, he said, softer. But today is something. She looked at him. Yes, she said, it is. Victor Aldgate walked out of that church without looking at anyone. Not at Nora, not at Harlan, not at Reeves or Gunner or Tobias, or any of the faces that watched him go. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. He went through it. She watched him go, and felt, not triumph exactly. Something more complicated than triumph. She felt the weight of Edmund, of 3 years of not knowing what had really happened, of the 1,000 small things a person carries when they're grieving and confused and alone. She felt it, and then she set it down, not forgotten, never forgotten, but set down. The way you set down something you've been carrying for so long you've forgotten. It's separate from you. Edmund was gone. He had been gone. He was always going to be gone. And what Aldgate had done would be accounted for. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not quickly, but accounted for. And she was here. Still here. With this ranch and these people and this man beside her, who had looked at a dying property and said, goodbye, and meant it, in more ways than either of them had. Understood at the time. She stood up. The celebration wasn't planned, it never is, with the right kind of people. You don't plan it. You just end up in the same place because where else would you go? The Voss Ranch. Obviously. The Sunfists brought food because Sigrid always brought food, and the universe would have to rearrange itself significantly before that changed. The Caldwells brought a jar of Helen's apple butter, which was better than most things Nora had tasted in years. Tobias showed up with his father, the two of them still slightly awkward with each other, in the specific way of fathers and sons, navigating a new kind of respect. But there, Reeves came. He stood at the edge of things for a while, uncertain of his welcome, understanding that welcome was something he'd have to rebuild slowly and couldn't demand or rush. Marcus Caldwell found him at the fence. The two men stood there a while. She didn't hear what they said, but she saw Marcus extend his hand, and Reeves take it, it was something. It was the beginning of something, which is all anything ever is, really. Ruby Caldwell found Harlan near the barn. He was there on the pretense of checking on the horses, which were fine, which he knew, which meant he was actually there because the crowd and the noise and the sustained attention of an entire community was a great deal for a man who'd spent 18 years with the quiet of mountains. Ruby appeared at his elbow. She looked up at him. "Mama said we won," she said. "Something like that," he said. "Did the bad man go away?" He looked at her. "The bad man is going to have to answer for what he did. That's how it works." Ruby considered this with great seriousness, like when I broke the window and had to tell Papa, like that. But considerably larger, she nodded, satisfied. "Then, are you staying?" He looked at her. "In Redstone Gap." She clarified. "Or are you going back to the mountains?" 7 years old, asking the question directly. Because 7-year-olds haven't learned yet to circle around the things they actually want to know. Harlan looked at the ranch, at the house, at the repaired fence lines and the barn with its new shingles and the garden that had gone from half-dead to genuinely producing, which had happened so gradually that you almost didn't notice until you did. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm going to stay." Ruby processed this. "Good," she said. "The horses like you." She turned and ran back to her mother. Harlan watched her go. Then he looked at the ranch, at the fence lines, at the barn, at the house with its lamp burning in the kitchen window. He'd lived in those mountains for 18 years. They'd given him everything. Solitude and skill, and a kind of peace that came from knowing exactly where you were and how to survive there. The mountains had been, for a very long time, the only place he trusted. But trust is not the same as wanting, and wanting, that was something he'd mostly stopped allowing himself, until 3 months ago, until a woman in a faded brown dress stood in a dusty square and saw him. Not what he was, just him. That was enough. "You know what I want to happen after," she'd said 9 days ago, in the dark. I'm not going to say it right now, but I want you to know that I know. He'd been turning that over ever since. Not because he didn't know what it meant, because he did, and because knowing what it meant required knowing what he was going to do with it. He'd been deciding. He'd decided. The crowd thinned as the afternoon went long. People had farms and animals and evening chores that didn't stop for victory or anything else. They left the way good people leave, with meaning it when they said they were glad. The Sunfists were last, because Sigrid had to gather the dishes, and Gunnar had to stand at the gate and say things in Norwegian that were clearly significant, and that Harlan listened to with quiet attention. "What did he say?" Nora asked. "After they'd gone," he said, "the mountain doesn't belong to anyone, but a good man belongs to the land he chooses." She looked at him. "Gunnar says things like that," he added. "He's earned the right," she said. The ranch was quiet now, the quiet that comes after a long day of loud things. Fuller than ordinary quiet. Different in the way of something that has been earned. Nora went inside, made coffee, came back out. 2 cups. He was at the porch steps. She sat beside him, close. The way she'd sat beside him 9 days ago, when she'd said the things she wasn't going to say yet. He took the cup she offered, They sat with the evening coming on, the light going warm and then going soft. The ridge to the west, holding the last of the sun, like it was in no hurry to let it go. She was thinking. He knew she was thinking because of the coffee. She'd taken it in 4 sips. The 4-sip pace of a woman at peace with something. Something she'd settled in herself. "Harlan," she said. "Nora." He said. And she laughed, because of course she did, because it was the thing they did. They said each other's names, and then stopped, and then one of them laughed, and it was the most honest thing between them. That small absurdity, that specific rhythm that was theirs and no one else's. "I need to say the thing," she said, "now. Because it's after, and I told you I was saving it for after." He waited. She looked at the mountain. When Edmund died, she said, "I didn't think, I genuinely did not believe, that I was capable of this again. This particular thing." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Not just love. That wasn't the word I was afraid of. The word I was afraid of was wanting. Wanting something for myself again. Wanting a future instead of just a continuation of the past." The evening was very still around them. "I started wanting things again," she said. 3 months ago. Roughly, she turned and looked at him. He was already looking at her. 3 months ago, he said, give or take a dusty town square. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee. He reached into his shirt pocket, and he put something on the porch rail between them. Small, white, smooth. Perfectly made, an arrowhead. She looked at it. Then at him. "My mother made this," he said. "Before she made it a long time ago. I've carried it since." She looked at the arrowhead, at the craftsmanship in it, the patience, the care of someone who made things to last. "Among my people," he said slowly. "A gift like this, it means protection, connection." He paused. "And it means I am here. I am not going anywhere." She looked at him. "You're sure?" she said. Not doubting him, just asking because he deserved to be asked. Because this deserved to be chosen consciously, not arrived at. "I have been sure," he said, "for longer than I knew how to say it." She reached out, picked up the arrowhead, felt the smoothness of it, the weight, the warmth from being in his pocket all this time. She closed her hand around it. "I have nothing that old to give you," she said. "I have a ranch that still needs about 100 things fixed. I have a disposition that's going to continue to be exactly what it is. She stopped. "I have myself, which is all I've had for a long time, and it'll have to do. It's sufficient," he said. The exact words he'd used before, months ago, when she'd made her rough accounting of what she could offer. And he'd said, "That's sufficient." "You said that the first time," she said. "I meant it both times." She looked at him for a moment. Then she leaned over and kissed him. Not dramatic, not a scene, just her and him and the porch in the evening light, and the coffee getting cold, and the mountain watching the way it watched everything, with the patience of something that has seen a great many things and knows which ones matter. When she pulled back, he was very still. The way he went still when something had genuinely surprised him. "Nora," he said. "Harlan," she said. And this time neither of them laughed. This time it was just their names. In the evening, on the porch of a ranch that was going to be all right. Autumn had settled in properly now. The air had an edge to it, the kind that smelled like pine and cold stone, and coming snow still weeks away, but making itself known in advance. Nora was in the garden before the sun was fully up, which was slightly irrational given the season, but the garden was the garden, and some things you just do. Harlan came out of the barn. He was carrying 2 cups. He always carried 2 cups now. He'd done it from almost the beginning. She'd never asked him to. He came to the garden fence and held one over it. She took it. They stood there in the early light. The mountains to the west still in shadow. The sky in the east going from dark to the particular pale gold of early autumn. She drank her coffee, 4 sips. He watched her drink it and said nothing, and she knew he was counting. "Stop counting," she said. "I'm not counting anything. You are absolutely counting. The coffee is good. I'm simply appreciating it." She looked at him. It's the same coffee it's always been. People change, he said. Sometimes the coffee changes with them. She stared at him for a long moment. That might be the most ridiculous thing you've ever said. Give me time. I'm still getting started. And there it was. That thing in his voice. Not quite amusement, the precursor to it. The thing she'd been watching for since the beginning and got to see more of lately. The part of Harlenberg that had been waiting, maybe for years, maybe for his whole adult life, to have somewhere safe enough to exist. She turned back to the garden. The east fence needs checking, she said. Already done, the chicken coop latch. Fixed it yesterday, the pump housing. This afternoon. I have a sequence. She looked at him. You have a sequence. Everything in order. Most efficient. Of course you do. She looked at the garden. At the fence line standing straight in the early light. At the barn with its new shingles, the well housing cleared, the house listed slightly east but solidly so. Leaning into whatever wind came, with the assurance of something that had been properly tended. She thought about Edmund. She thought about him most mornings, probably always would. She thought, this is not instead of you. It's not instead of anything. It's just the next thing, the thing that comes after. Which you told me to find. Be strong, he'd said, holding her hand. Those last hours. She was, Harlan, she said. The valley is going to have questions. About the investigation. About Aldgate. About what comes next for all of us. Yes, and about us. People are going to have opinions about us. They'll have them whether we provide them or not, he said. That's true. And we've managed their opinions before, we have. She drank the last of her coffee. Set the cup on the fence post. Looked at the mountain. I've been thinking, she said. I know, don't start. 4 sips. You were peaceful. Planning, I was going to say, she said with great dignity, that I've been thinking we should write to your mother. Through the agency. Try again. He went still. The kind of still that was different from his other kinds of still. The kind that meant something had reached somewhere deep. I don't know if the letters get through, he said. Then we try until they do. He looked at the mountain. She'd want to know. Nora said carefully. That you found somewhere? That you're... She stopped. He looked at her. That you're all right, she finished. She'd want to know you're all right. His jaw worked for a moment, just a moment. Then he looked back at the mountain and nodded once. She picked up her cup from the fence post. Empty. She went back to the garden. He stayed at the fence a moment longer, looking at the ridge. At the high places he knew better than anyone. At the mountains that had held him for 18 years and given him everything he needed and none of what he wanted. He thought, still water, if you can hear this somehow. Through whatever the mountains carry. He thought, I'm all right. He thought I found somewhere. Then he finished his coffee and went to start on the pump housing. Because the pump housing was next. Because he had a sequence. Because some mornings, the most extraordinary thing about a life is simply that it continues, ordinary and whole and entirely worth the keeping. She went back to the garden. He went to the pump housing. The mountain watched. As it always had, good bones.